right. So there's three interlocutors, Cephalus, Polemarchus, and Thrasymachus, and they are very different characters, very different individuals. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about Plato's life, and then we'll move into the content itself. Because that'll also give me the chance a little bit to talk about methodology. I guess, first of all, what was it like reading Plato's Republic? I know some of you've read it before. Was it anything that struck you about it?
It's kind of less about, like, I think the subject of what they were talking about, but I think the argument style was a little confusing to me at
Good.
first.
Very good.
It kind of felt like they were hyper-focusing only on justice and ignoring a lot of other things that play a role into, like, deciding on, like, what justice means to people. Like, I think mostly just, like, morals and how they differ based on people in society. I feel like just wasn't really mentioned very much,
Okay.
at least in the first of, like, the books.
All right, so this is really interesting. That something about the way that they decide, oh, we're going to tackle this subject. Like you're saying that the way they tackled it, maybe, tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but like that is kind of abstract instead of being linked to like questions of subjective experience.
I think kind of, yeah. I think it's like I think just kind of focusing too much on justice itself and not really taking into account like the other things that make up justice.
Okay.
Like, I think they're trying to give like a definitive definition to justice, but the examples they're using are subjective.
What are the things that make up justice? Do you think? Like, what are the things you think they're leaving out? This is a really good comment.
I would say kind of like, I mean, I want to say morals again, mostly like on what's their right and their wrong or their good versus their bad. And I think that's very subjective again to just like their experiences growing up.
Good.
And then I think it's kind of in the same boat, but I think a lot of justice is almost synonymous with revenge in a way. Kind of like getting.
Say more.
Just like getting back what, I don't want to say what you lost, but I'm just trying to think of the best way to phrase it. I mean, I just want to say fair. I feel like that's kind of like the way they described it in the text mostly. It's just fairness. And that's what they were expanding on, but I don't know, I think that's really the best I have right now.
Good. No, all of this is really helpful. Anyone else?
Yes. Just to like branch on that, it's like there's very much, I think, an attempt in this book at getting to like an objective standard of justice rather than like, I think there's a modern standard of the postmodern sort of what's the word that I'm looking for? I guess just postmodernism, like relativism of like morals being something that's very specific to the subjectivity of the person. I mean, imagine that's increased by the individualization of our society. But like, yeah, they're arguing on a larger playing field than one person. They're trying to apply their ideas to everyone in their whole society.
Okay, so perspectivism, I think, is a good word for what you're describing. Yeah. So I'm going to write that down. And perspectivism is going to have in it, I guess, elements of different experiences. That's going to have to do with history, that's going to have to do with context, that's going to have to do with culture, that's going to have to do with material realities, art, very context-driven stuff. And it seems like they're trying to get something universal that could be really stuck in perspective. The way that a Platonic philosopher would refer to this would be, and you probably see this in the translation at different points, they'll talk about this in terms of custom versus nature. Does that resonate with anyone? Custom versus nature. Custom are the particular habits or preferences or values that, you know, different people in different contexts make. And they can be, customs can be good or bad, but the idea is sort of, how do I put this? Aristotle talks about, this is probably a handy term for us generally. Aristotle talks about something, and I'd write this down for sure, called practical reasoning. And what he defines it as is practical reasoning is reasoning about things that could be otherwise. Reasoning about things that could be otherwise. Okay, well that sounds kind of vague. Here's maybe a concrete example. If I were to ask you what is the answer to 377 times 46, there's one answer to that. You 377 times 46 will yield one answer, and it will always yield that answer if you're using a particular numerical system. 377 times 46 is something that can't be otherwise. There's no alternative answer. Practical reasoning is about things that can be otherwise. So something that could, you know, in some countries, for example, they might have as a stop sign a green stop sign, right? And here we have a red stop sign. Doesn't matter if it's green or red. No, right? It's just custom. In one culture, green is associated with stopping. In another culture, it's associated with stopping if it's red. And this could be green or red. It doesn't matter, right? That is reasoning about things that could be otherwise. What Aristotle does, and also what Plato does, and in Aristotle in a way is kind of pulling this out of Plato, but I think is important to put at the start for us. He's going to say that politics is, well, let's say morality and politics is reasoning about things that could be otherwise. Now, another way of saying that would be to say, in politics, we use practical reasoning. Well, here's the thing. Not every political question is going to be, well, should our stop sign be green or red? Sometimes political questions have to do with moral outcomes. Should our Constitution, you know, allow slavery or not? Literally, that's the debate they had at the beginning, right, of the American Constitution. And we all would be like, well, it shouldn't have it, right? It shouldn't have it. And we would say, this is something that it's not so insignificant as a green or red stop sign. It matters a lot more. Aristotle's still going to say that this is still reasoning about that which could be otherwise. What does that mean? It means that in politics, the way you think about justice, that there could be something you identify as being unjust, right? And you bracket it. But there might be a number of arrangements that could be just or fall within the realm of justice. So Aristotle, for example, will talk about, you know, he has a preference for the mixed regime, but he talks about kind of what a good oligarchy would look like. He talks about what a good tyrant would look like even. right? Meaning a tyranny that's good for the average person in there, which is to say the least bad tyranny it can be. And so he's going to be talking about something that I'm not doing a good job of explaining this. Something that that can't be precise. Okay, like in the example I gave, in politics, there might be a number of arrangements of political offices, for example, that you could see as being connected to justice, right? And people will design, people in different places because of history or context or whatever, will arrange things differently. But you could say, well, this is a fairly just regime, this is a fairly just regime, but comparatively they're quite different. That's because politics is something that exists in the realm of what can be otherwise. Another way to say that is politics is the kind of thing of which you will never be able to get mathematical precision. You can't have processes like you have in math and science, which will be the application of a method to yield like a type of objective answer. And this goes back to what you guys are noticing. Because if we're dealing with something that exists in the realm of what could be otherwise, then the question is, what methodology would you use to end up at an answer in the world of what can be otherwise? And there's lots of different answers to this question, but the answer that Socrates gives is dialectic. And I'd write that down or type it. Dialectic. Now, I really like y'all's first impressions of the text because I felt very similarly the first time I read it. In my case, the first time I read it, I was like, we're reading, and Cephalus is talking about chickens and sacrificing chickens and justice. This is a rich old man. What does this tell me about justice? It's like, this is just so particular, and I don't even know what to do with it. And in a way, that's another way of saying what you've said, right? Which is, it seems like they're talking about something that's very particular as if it's universal. I'd write that down. It seems, if you're dealing with Cephalus, Polemarchus, or Thrasymachus, it seems like they're describing these really particular things that could be otherwise, as if they'll always be the same everywhere, or you can draw universal conclusions from it. Well, we've already said morality, politics is not where this type of reasoning would work. You guys are doing a great job because your response is literally the response Plato wants you to have. He wants you to say, wait, there's a problem. There's a problem with how you're talking about justice. He wants you to say that 3 times, with each one of them. And ultimately, he wants you to say that for the entire book. He's trying to provoke the specific response in you that you've had. This is one of the reasons why reading Plato is so different. He is weird and it is random. But there's something that he's able to do, which I've never been able to recreate or even properly describe. And it's that he can get into your head and walk you down a path where you're going to hit particular questions and insights at the time he wants you to hit them. And you're going to generate that question on your own, not because he's presenting it to you as a question, but because in order to follow the argument, you have to look at corollaries of, I guess you could say, curiosities, questions, and emotions. Like, if a certain argument is presented, in some sense, what he's interested in is the process of your response to the argument, where you generate the next objection or the next question. It's different than other types of philosophy where things are presented to you as A, B, C, D, and then it persuades, right? It's also different than the things we've studied that are philosophical but more literary, right? Which those tend to be more impressionistic, right? More big picture. It actually kind of combines both. He doesn't want us to just listen to him. He wants us to engage in a path of questioning itself. So your reaction to it is the exact reaction it's designed to have. You're supposed to say, wait, is justice even something that we can talk about in this way? And in your mind, you're supposed to be feeling all these feelings they're talking about. Well, what about historical context? What about culture? What about all these different things that are very real objections? When you're reading him, it's supposed to be generating an unsettledness inside you. This is what I mean by methodology. This is what dialectic is. Okay, seriously. Well, what is dialectic? That sounds really vague. Okay, let me give you a particular. Has anyone here read the Symposium? Okay, so Plato's Symposium is, I think it's a little bit of a later text, and if you use it by traumatic settings. But how do I want to put this? There's a very important moment where Socrates talks about the greatest lesson he ever learned. And it doesn't sound maybe like super profound, but in its context, in the historical context, it is. And he says, okay, in the metaphysics of his day, pre-Socratic metaphysics, you have someone called Zeno, right? And he is going to sort of put out as a first rule of logic that if something is A, it is not B, right? If something is B, it's not A. Sounds simple, right? The way, and it's not even that it's untrue, but the way this gets rendered then is that all arguments, all observations have to be delivered as binaries, okay? Something is something or not something. Our options are yes or no. And that's it, yes or no. What he says he learns at the end of, well, when he gives his part of the Symposium, is that he learns that way of talking about things is entirely mistaken. Now, what is interesting is that he doesn't say it's mistaken because there's nothing objective. That's one way that we can go, and that's typically the way it goes in modernity. But it it's not the rejection of some type of objectivity for subjectivity entirely. What he does, which is interesting, is he says there's a woman, and this is really crazy because this is the only time he ever says that anyone taught him something he didn't already know in the corpus, and it's a woman named Diotima. And Diotima describes to him that love and truth are one. She says the beautiful, the true, the lovable are all one. And when you love something, right, it's a response to the beautiful or the true in it. Whatever's beloved, what you love about it is something in it that you're apprehending as beautiful or true. What she does that's really interesting as a next step is she says, this is why the way that this A is not B paradigm won't work. This is why this binary yes or no, true or false won't work. Because anything that you recognize something in that is meaningful or good or lovable or true, even if you're really mistaken about what it is, right? Something beautiful or true or good is in it. What we're supposed to do is we should look at our experience, look at our phenomena, and instead of saying, I'm going to split it up into good or bad, I'm going to split it up into true or false. You're going to take the experience and ask, what about this is true / good? That's what you're going to do. What about this is true / good? This is, I know it sounds like I'm talking about random stuff that doesn't matter, but it really will matter for the Republic. Whatever it is in there that has that glimmer of truth or goodness in it, hold on to it and ascend into another mutation. Yes?
That's what I find so interesting about it is that, by saying that everything has a truth and a good in it, he's also sort of creating a binary.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying that the binary itself is wrong because you shouldn't go in with that mindset. You should go in looking for the true and the good. But that the other stuff is just ancillary.
Okay, so good.
There still is there still is a false. It's just that you shouldn't focus on it because it doesn't get you.
Yeah, so one question is, in terms of the methodology, what you're saying is, well, how is this ultimately really different than a binary approach?
Yeah.
And I think this is it's a really interesting question. It's something I kind of ask myself a lot about too. But keep your mind open, because when we get to the end of the Republic, I'm not sure that the response is binary.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. This is one of the things you're going to have to be asking. The whole text is about, basically, is the good, the true, the beautiful one? is it unified? That is literally, I'd write that down. Is the good, is the true, is the beautiful one? Is it unified? Now, think back to what we've studied so far. In a certain sense, let's say, the question of Plato's Republic is, what is justice? But behind this question is another question, really, which is the good, the true, the beautiful one? And think back to kind of what we've been doing this term with, we studied Thucydides, we studied Pericles, we studied the Davidic texts, and we studied the Iliad. And one of the things that, we're kind of being set up for is that Plato is inheriting all the previous arguments. And one thing that Thucydides does, and that Homer does, is they're basically saying the world doesn't have an order. It's unstable. Remember, we talked about this? The underlying metaphysics is unstable. And so you can make order, and Homer looks at that through roles-based virtue, right? Or you can eventually, what you'll see is, like, by the end of Thucydides, you say order is only a matter of force. And you guys probably saw that Thrasymachus is basically the argument of the Melian dialogue. Okay, it's that the strong, right, determine what justice is through their will, through their force. So what he's really doing, kind of, in this whole thing, asking about what justice is, he's going to want to argue that the good, the true, and the beautiful are one. This is in distinction to all of the previous tradition. This is part of why it's such, in context, radical text. It's arguing, in a sense, the opposite of what his predecessor cultures have. Yeah.
Like, if you can make order, then order exists as a force. Like, you are, just because you create the force does not mean that you are not embodying something larger.
Right. But then the question, and that's fantastic, right? Just because you might have to create or manufacture the force or the legitimacy doesn't mean that you aren't a part or tapping into something bigger. But then, of course, the question is, how do you know what that looks like, and who gets to determine it? That is literally what the entire Republic is about. All of these questions in embryo at the very beginning. Because sure, let's say that, okay, maybe it is one. Well, how will we even know it, right? And then how would we decide who knows it? And how would we decide that they have legitimacy? I think in the end, the question's complicated. It's not the one that he literally gives in the text. This is my big thing. Do not read this text literally, for all the reasons that I have just said. This is a dialectical text. That means it's a pedagogical text. So you probably notice they keep disagreeing with each other and contradicting each other, and they'll come to a conclusion. It's not very satisfactory, and then they have to keep going, right? And then it looks like maybe the conclusion you had is not going to be the one you get, but it's comes back again, like in 20 pages. Okay, this is not a literal text. It is not literal and it is not linear. Okay? Not literal, not linear. It is a process. It's a text that is a process. Okay, so again, you could say, well, that sounds really vague and also like not easy to understand how why that even matters, right? And what you're just telling us all this stuff about methodology up front, we haven't even talked about the text, we haven't even talked about the arguments, it's very unspecific. Well, you're right. But that's because before you can really appreciate the text, you have to appreciate the methodology. Because this is the way that Plato thinks you can get into reality. Well, how can we get into reality if it's not linear and it's not literal? This is how. What is it? It is a play. The Republic is literally a play. Like, it is as if you were watching it. You need to read it like a very long, boring play. Like, every person that talks is a character. And there's little hints given to their psychology, their intention, their preferences. The order that they're presented in is the order meant to reveal a certain plot, philosophical plot, but it's still a plot. The narrative order matters. Setting of everything matters. Okay? Order of questions taken matters. It is an actual play. It is not meant to be linear or literal. It's meant to be entered into. Dialectic requires identifying with the text. That doesn't mean like think about when you watch a drama, right, or a comedy. There might be aspects of a character that really resonate with you. But if a text is good, if a play or a movie is good, there's going to be a couple of people that are resonating with you, right? Even the people that might not act how you act, they're resonating with something familiar to you. That's part of how it's possible that you can have insight. This is the same thing. It's just philosophically done. Yes?
I also feel like good writing doesn't make you identify with any character.
Yes, good. Say more.
Every character has some things you agree with and some things you disagree with, parts of their argument that make sense. Like even Socrates, who's kind of the end-all be-all in this book of like,
yes,
seeking truth. I like there are definitely things about his perfect regime that are like critiquable and like made to exist in a way that is clearly not literally perfect. Like that's
yes.
the whole like question of the book is that
right.
You can't have a human that's perfect.
You can't have a human. I like that. But before I forget, I'm just going to write down the word before aporia is it's often the byproduct of a dialectical method. It's where you get to a place where you've hit the limit of your questioning. You've hit the limit of what you can describe. And you might only be able to say what something is not versus what it is. Okay? A lot of times in Plato's text, you don't end up with any sort of firm answer. You end up with like a sketch almost. And this is because built into the method itself is this idea that there's a limit to what is knowable. Okay? Aporia is the thing. But like you said, in order for something like that to be possible, there can't be one clear right person, right character, right argument. There have to be glimmers of it in different places and different things, right? For it to give rise to aporia. And so that's another thing to keep in mind is you'll keep going. Is this making sense? Right, let's talk about the first character then. So the first character is Cephalus. What can you tell me about our friend Cephalus?
He like kind of takes his father's definition, but like broadens it more, which is like generally made out to be an example. But like he, I forgot what he said exactly, but it's about like giving to one what like to each to one is owed.
Good.
Um, and like that's just his broad general definition of justice.
Good.
And like Socrates doesn't entirely like disagree with it, but he just sort of makes an example of the flaws in it.
Good. Very good. Yes.
He's kind of like an oligarch. Like he has a lot of money and part of the democracy, but I think the way his character is framed is kind of important too because he talks about how he can't enjoy dialectic until he's like too old to like care about his pleasures in life. So he can't care about this until he literally
can't. No. Okay. Great. You guys are doing fantastic. So you've described the first two definitions of justice. So Cephalus is going to be paying debts and not breaking contracts. Polemarchus is going to be giving what is due, but specifically giving benefits to friends and harm to enemies. So I'd write that down. When the text starts, it begins at the Piraeus. And because this is, like I said, a play, people of the time reading it would have known exactly what that meant. The Piraeus is a port near Athens where there's going to be a rebellion against the 30 tyrants. Okay, we talked about this is when Athens loses the war, right? And they're rebelling against Sparta. So in the dramatic setting in this dialogue, that hasn't happened yet. But everybody reading the dialogue would know, okay, this is where the seat of this resistance is going to happen. The men that are involved in the dialogue are politically important and characters that the readers would know. Cephalus's family is very involved in the rebellion, and Polemarchus actually dies in the rebellion. This conversation then, the person reading it would know it's not theoretical, okay? The setting itself tells you it's not theoretical. It's real. They're wanting you to think about how these questions determine life and death. So the first definition of justice is Cephalus's. Socrates asked Cephalus, what's the greatest good you've received from being wealthy? And this is a good example of how circular this, or how roundabout this method can be. Socrates says to Cephalus, what's the best thing that you've gotten from being wealthy? Do you remember what he answers? He's like, oh, I'm an old man, looking back on my life, I'm really rich. What I realize, some people would say the greatest good of being wealthy is that, I got to eat all these foods, or I got to travel all these places, or I got to be with all these girls. But the thing that really was the best thing is what? He says, I never had to cheat or deceive. Because I was wealthy, I never had to cheat or deceive. So I'd write that down. And then Socrates says, well, basically say more about that. What is good about that? And Cephalus says, you're able to pay what you owe. The benefit, so the greatest good of wealth for him is that you're able to pay what you owe. And from here, together, Socrates and Cephalus nail down the first definition of justice, which is, I'd write this down, speaking the truth and paying one's debts. Speaking the truth and paying one's debts. Tell me what's true about that definition.
I mean, like as Socrates uses, probably speaking the truth is the true part, and paying your debts is kind of based on what your conditions are. Like paying your debts to an evil debtor is extorting you. Then, like, why is that moral?
Okay, good, right. So one thing is, you say speaking the truth. Well, you'd say that's speaking the truth seems to be better than speaking lies, right? What's the opposite of the truth? A lie. Okay. And we should pay people what we owe them. The problem, as you pointed out, is figuring out what you owe someone. Like, what is owed. Everyone who says you owe such and such thing, it doesn't mean that it's not exploitative. We think about contracts. We can all think about contracts that we think are exploitative, that aren't really something that you agree to, even if you have agreed to it. Yes, the devil's bargain built into it, right? That you're agreeing to something that in the end the cost of it is so steep, right? And you won't be able to pay it. It's not a fair bargain for you, right? It's not a fair bargain for you. Also, there are elements in what Cephalus says of basic distributive justice, and I write that down, distributive justice. Basic distributive justice. I shouldn't tell you there won't be a quiz and then give you a quiz when you walk into the classroom. That would be deceitful of me, right? We could all recognize just instinctually that would be unjust. Here is where the play aspect of it, I think, gives us more insight. So you go, okay, well, I see the definition, you can kind of see its benefits, its limits. Let's go on what seems like a side quest. In the Republic, you're going to go on side quests over and over again. Okay, and they all matter. They all matter. Nothing in the text is useless. So here is our side quest with Cephalus. Justice is clearer to him now. Justice is clearer to Cephalus now. Why? Old guy, old rich guy, reflecting on his life.
Well, he can no longer engage in these pleasures, so he's no longer clouded by pleasures as the draw of his morality. Like, if you constantly draw yourself towards pleasures, you'll justify that regardless of whether it's moral.
Okay, good. Okay, so if in the text he notes, no, you're exactly right. As we age, the pleasures of the body die. That's like around 320 AD. As we age, the pleasures of the body die. And that has made it easier for him to understand what justice requires, because what stopped him from understanding what justice required before was the pursuit of pleasure. Old age is taking care of that for him. And he makes a contrast between him and other old men. And he says basically, other old men, quote, take it hard, as though they were deprived of something very important. And that when they were young, they lived well, but are now not even alive. And basically what he's saying is like, other old men, you know, they just think about all the money they used to make, all the sex they used to have, like they try to recapture their youth with a shiny new car, right? And they don't realize, Cephalus says, that actually they're in a better place. Like they're trying to bring back these desires and like flame them up and stuff, and they miss those days, the good old days. But he says, actually, those weren't the good old days, because now we have peace. And he makes a comparison that's going to come up over and over again in the Republic, which is that desires drive you. You don't drive your desires. Desires drive you. He makes the connection between desires and what he calls mad slave drivers. Desires basically keep whipping you, never giving you peace. This is how he describes desire. What is the relationship then between old age and good character?
Perspective on pain.
Say more.
I mean, when you've lived long enough, you've experienced enough pain, then therefore should, like, by extension, have the lesson and not, like, cause it upon others.
Oh, okay. I really like this. One of the things that comes out a lot in Cephalus's definition is pleasure, obviously, but the flip side of that is pain, right? Is pain. So pleasure is a focus of his discussion, but by implication, pain is too. And in a way, he's saying, well, these other old guys have it backwards. You know, they think the way they live now is painful. But that's because they misapprehend what the good actually was. They think being driven by the pleasures was pleasurable, but actually being driven by the pleasures was painful, and it caused pain to other people, right? What's really pleasurable is not to be driven by the pleasures. And this has only been possible because of old age. Does this mean that being good is contingent on being old?
I mean, I would argue, or I guess maybe question what their thought was.
Good.
Because I feel
Yeah.
like when you talk about like pleasures driving, you know, your motivations instead of being young, most people would probably assume like maybe like teenagers to 40s, 50s, and like that big chunk of your life
Mm-hmm.
youthful. And they say like getting old is just something that like they've never experienced, and like doing that, like aging takes away all of their motivations and like their drive and their hunger that they once had. But like, what about if you're a child? Like they've been in that stage before. Like they're acting like they've never experienced like maybe not having a hunger or drive or motivation or having money or like or wanting to hook up. Like they like
Right.
they have been there before. Like you're a prepubescent child, like do not remember having a childhood, and like you were also not driven by like desires and motivation. Like I would say arguably even less because of how innocent kids are.
Good.
So, I mean, I feel like it doesn't necessarily have to coincide with old age and aging. And I'm not sure why it's so like unfamiliar.
No. That's fantastic. I mean, that's a really great insight. Yeah, and this is one of the things that I've never heard anyone say that in all the years I taught Plato. And this is part of why it's such a cool text. Because, yeah, I mean, one of the questions this raises is, well, I mean, actually, there probably have been times that have some similarity to old age. And if we're thinking about things in terms of freedom and just self-determination, being very young might be one of these times. Here and then here, yes.
I would say maybe alluding to it being higher to not be driven by desires in their youth, or like when they, and not wait until they're old enough to not, for it just not to be an option anymore.
Okay, good. So one of the things that you're bringing up here that is really important to remember, how we talked about the Greeks and necessity, right? That necessity is more animalistic and freedom is the opposite of that. Well, you could look at what Cephalus is saying in that way. He's saying, well, when you're young, you're driven by necessity. But now that the pleasures that drove me are gone and they're not in the picture, I'm not driven by necessity. I'm actually free. Well, are you really free? It's just that the source of your disturbance went away. But have you actually changed? Have you become more free, less guided by necessity? No, your necessity is gone. The necessity that drove you of pleasure is gone. You haven't changed at all. If it came back the next day, you'd be acting the same way. Yes?
Well, I just find the comment about infancy and adult and old age so interesting because like, infancy, given that like this sort of a spectrum of beginning your life, your pleasures are really, really highly tuned and you're experiencing everything in this extremely pleasurable way. But then it sort of wanes as you get into the middle life. But I feel like the middle life is distinct from the infancy because when you're an infant, you almost don't even understand. The pleasures are so intense, you don't understand what's going on. So like you're not actually, you think you're free when you're a baby. Like you have the belief that necessity does not drive you because necessity is the kind of thing that just happens to you. And without your agency, you don't believe that necessity is like what necessity is. You don't have a way of making it a distinct thing. So you just like see the world in the same way an old man would see it, in this way of like, well, the world is just a series of things, and we can make good things happen and make bad things happen. And to a baby, that's just, you know, I can rattle my rattle or scream at my mom, but like nothing matters that much, you know.
Well, it's interesting too because in y'all's discussion is kind of emerging, just even from like a biological perspective, pleasure is an important teacher. Like this is lewd, but I mean, if a baby didn't feel happy when they had a bowel movement or when they peed, they didn't get pleasure from doing that, there's no guarantee they would do that. Like an adult can know, okay, I have waste and I have to let go of the waste, right, for my body to function and be healthy. A child doesn't know that. A baby doesn't know that. So how are they able to do that? Because they're led by pleasure and pain. Okay, if you need to go to the bathroom, it's uncomfortable, and once you go, it's pleasurable. That is literally how someone who's not yet conscious, right, makes these kind of choices.
Yeah, so it's like pleasure starts as a parent. It only becomes a slaver later.
Right. This is one of the, and you guys have done a beautiful job. This is part of what I mean, like about the text being dialectical, is that there's stuff Cephalus is saying that's going to stay the whole time. And one of them is that he has pointed out that pleasure and pain have a role to play in moral freedom and moral choice, right? It's being introduced like a character or a theme from the beginning. A part of this question about justice is going to mean having to ask questions about pleasure, about pain. But, right, Cephalus, because of the age thing, he's raising a particular problem of pleasure and pain, like connected to different states of life. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, then you can't say something universal about pleasure and pain because it seems to be context driven, right? Cephalus can handle things more justly because his pleasures are more mild. Okay? Well, to a Greek, that would mean he's still a creature of necessity. And that would mean he's not actually just. If you can do what justice requires, if you can pay your debts and not break contracts because you don't experience, there's no pleasure from breaking contracts and making debts, the pleasure's gone, right? And this is what justice is. Are you really just? Are you really just? Cephalus makes it sound like the only way you can be just is if you're old and you don't have desires anymore, erotic desires. This should make you ask yourself, what was Cephalus like when he was young? This is what the whole age thing is about. Ask yourself, as a character, what is Cephalus telling you? What was he like when he was young? Yes?
I mean, in part what he's saying is that money makes you good, because when
Good.
you don't have desires, you don't spend your money on the desires.
Right.
So you can hoard it and keep more and more and more of it.
Okay, fantastic. So here's the nexus of the character of Cephalus. It's pleasure, pain, and money, wealth. And the implication of what he's saying, I'm old now, so I can be just. What does being just mean? To him, it means that I pay my debts and I don't break contracts. When I was young and I was driven by pleasures, I was unjust, which means I did what when I was young? I didn't pay back my debts and I broke my contracts. When I was young, I lied. Young Cephalus, he was a liar, he was a cheater, he was a debtor, and a contract breaker. This is 100% where you're supposed to go. Absolutely, right? Cephalus, now that he's old, can pay back his debts, and he doesn't have to break contract terms anymore because he's old and wealthy. How is he able to be old and wealthy? Because he stayed alive by lying and cheating, and he accumulated wealth by lying and cheating. The only way Cephalus has become his definition of justice is by being his definition of injustice when he was young, by necessity. He can follow justice now because he did everything he needed to do to become just, but in order to do that, he practiced injustice all the time. Oh yeah, go for it.
I was just gonna say, I think it's, well, two things. One, like, it's interesting how quickly they forget about, I guess, their past and like
Good.
previous stages in their life.
Very good.
It's
Very
almost
good.
paradoxical to say, like, because I have wealth and I have money now, I have the fortune of being a stand-up citizen and a good person because I don't have to lie and cheat and steal my way through life. I just have money to fix that, so I don't have to be a bad person.
Yeah.
And it's like, but in order to have money, I did have to be a bad person at one point. So it's like that part is excluded, and it is kind of a rule that's generalized and applied to everybody in that sense.
Yeah. No,
So
that's
like,
really
well,
interesting.
you have to be a bad person so that inevitably you can get money to become a good person. But just forget about that first part.
But forget about the first. You have to live long enough to survive it too, right?
Yeah, and I think that like it's also interesting how like honesty, in a sense, is almost looked at like a luxury through his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like in order, or I no longer have to like cheat and deceive because of my wealth.
Right.
But it's like that's a luxury that's always been like presented to you. Like there's plenty of people that don't have wealth that don't do that. And there's plenty of people that do have wealth that still do that.
Yeah.
So that's
right.
always been a way available to you. You just
right. Yeah, like could someone use wealth in a just way, right? Or obtain wealth in a just way? Or because on his account, no. On his account, no. And in fact, you can't get wealthy without being unjust, according to Cephalus, and you can't be just without being unjust, according to Cephalus. Now, like if you think about Les Miserables, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie or the musical or read the book, but it all starts because there's this man who steals bread because his like niece is starving, right? And so what person that had starving children in their life wouldn't steal, right? I mean, honestly, if you had no way of feeding your young ones in your family, there's a lot you would do. You would not care about the law. And that in itself kind of points to something, well, maybe the law, maybe contracts and debts, maybe that's not able to keep justice, right? Because there's something unjust about the person who can't eat and has to be called a thief when they got the food they needed. This is one of the problems that's being raised. Another thing to keep in mind, and I think it goes really well with your comment, do you guys remember how Cephalus kind of leaves the scene? Because it ends, right? They're like in this luxurious place, they're chatting. He goes to worship, and how does he worship?
Like sacrificing, right?
Yes. He's sacrificing chickens. Why is this important in our discussion? Cephalus says, he's just now. Now he's got to do the thing he does in this part of his life.
Then by divine justice, you have to have wealth to expand.
Yeah, he's buying the gods off. Fantastic, very good, right? He's bribing the gods. That's how he sees it. He's like, I have done all these bad things, but now that I've done all these bad things, I have the wealth that will allow me to appease the gods for what I've done. And so I spend most of my days on paying for these sacrifices as a type of atonement. My wealth purchases my justice. Well, this means that the gods can be bought. Like that you can be like unjust your whole life. And like as long as at the end you make the proper sacrifices and give them enough blood, they're going to say you're just. Yes.
And the blood comes from the lies. Like the only reason he has all the chickens is because he did that to he exploited all of these poor people.
Right.
And therefore the chickens kind of are the poor people. He's sacrificing. Right. He's like, the idea of good is so important that I'm going to sacrifice everybody around me to get the idea of good eventually.
Yeah.
Well, that's not what good is.
Yeah, no. I mean, this is a really important point. One thing that Cephalus's character raises is you end up and Thrasymachus gets you in this spot too, actually, where civil society and what civil society calls justice is dependent on sacrificing others. That is one of the dark sides of Cephalus's argument. And so you have that dark side, but then you also have the sort of other parts of what we talked about earlier, which do have some truth in it. Yeah.
I feel like it's back to like the division of virtues, and like, I mean, it's kind of like an illusion of division because
Good.
they both end up falling into the same way.
Very good.
Like he is praising basically praising like virtues of goods, but by extension, he then has to have like the strength for that. So strength by power.
Yeah. Good. Good. Very good. Thanks for taking us back there. Because remember, we talked about the Republic is an inheritor, right, of these debates that are happening inside Hellenic society, and where you get to, starting with Homer, is that there's this difference between what are called the goods, I guess, of virtue, maybe, and the goods of effectiveness. And if we go back to the Iliad using MacIntyre, the goods of effectiveness are winning and victory, right? Resources of some kind. But sometimes to win, you might have to abandon the goods of virtue. That's a possibility, right? That's kind of like one of the things that's raised. Hector does everything right, so to speak. Hector's always going to lose. Okay, doing the right thing, Hector is never going to beat Achilles. His wife is never not going to become a slave and raped. He's the one who has the goods of virtue. But what does it get him in the end? And so again, this question of strength, right? The thing that it seems is raised is, well, maybe the strength is the thing that matters more. And when you get to the Million Dialogue and Thucydides, that's what the Athenians say. They say, we determine what is just and what is unjust because we're stronger than you. And it is the right of the more powerful person to determine what justice is. Justice is just the will of the stronger. What does this go back to? What we're talking about earlier here. The world is just chaos. So justice is just force. Okay, justice is just, thank you for bringing it back. And this is one example of it, okay? Because in order to get the things he needed to be able to become virtuous, he had to do all these unvirtuous things, right? And in order to become powerful, he had to sacrifice virtue. So when he got to a certain point, he could enjoy virtue. Yes?
There's a degree to which they're like the good of effectiveness kind of is chaos. Like force is the force of chaos. When you have a war and everybody's like attempting to be the dominant force, that creates as much chaos as you could possibly create. Like, it's really not force that creates order. Force only creates order very temporarily.
Right.
If at all.
Right. No, that's a really good point. And I would point back to, okay, I said the dialogue is about what is justice, but behind that is another question, which is the good, the true, the beautiful one? So is our world ordered by justice or by force? That's the question. that is the question of the Republic. Is our world ordered by justice or by force? Is what we inhabit and participate in and create a space where you could say, at the end of the day, there's an order that can be known? Or is it something where, at the end of the day, everything is chaos, so all that exists is strong? This is the question. Now, if we're thinking about this from a dialectical perspective again, it's interesting because that is where Cephalus's psychology and his definition ultimately go. Like when you engage in the Socratic method and you keep hunting it down, that is where it goes. And the portrait you get of the world is one where things are basically a state of war. You can be eaten or you can eat. But what, kind of the good life is the one where you don't have to be out there eating and destroying anymore. But even that just becomes a thing where the consuming just gets put into another metaphysical plane. You're not consuming on earth only, you're doing this transactional thing with the gods. Okay, so the consume or be consumed dichotomy is still there. It's still alive, even if you're able to put it into the next world. And what does that mean? It means the gods, who are the source of justice, are unjust. This is one of the big, really important things. If the gods require this kind of sacrifice, right, then the gods are unjust. If they're going to reward a man who did all these terrible things by giving him eternal life because he gave enough chicken blood, and they're going to punish someone who didn't do any of these horrible things but doesn't have any chickens, what does that tell you? It tells you that the gods are purely about transaction. That the universe and the divine order is purely about transaction. And this is, Thrasymachus is obviously dark, but this is dark. The starting one is quite dark. The first definition of justice, the first exploration, the first themes you are thrown into are basically an invitation to have to grapple with the idea that the divine is unjust, that the divine is tyrannical. That is the first definition of justice. Puts you in a place where you have tyrannical gods. That is shocking. Okay, that should be shocking. And in a way, that's more shocking than Thrasymachus. Because what does the god do? The gods do. These gods consume us. We only matter to them insofar as we can give them what they want. How do we give them what they want? By breaking contracts, making debts, doing injustice, spilling blood of humans, right? And then flipping, right? And changing it to chickens that you purchase. And you allow the gods to consume. So you're making a sacrifice of other people, or you're making a sacrifice of chickens. But what the gods really want is for you to feed them. And you, in that sense, are a sacrifice to them too. They consume you too. Cephalus's cosmology is one that is extremely dark, where humans are made only to feed the gods. And there are some humans who are going to be stronger, and so they're still going to be used to feed the gods, but they're going to attack all these people under them, right? And then there's going to be humans who are weaker, and they're going to feed the gods by being the victim. That is the first insight you have into justice in the Republic.
Like the most pessimistic version of the great chain.
Yeah, exactly. And one where the great chain of being is a chain of disorder that's only structured by force. The gods are the most powerful, right? Yeah, the gods are the most powerful. So, yep. All right. Next time we'll do Polemarchus and Thrasymachus. And remember, everything that gets put out, it comes back again. It's being raised to like bring up issues and questions in your mind. Okay? So if you have your commonplace book, I will take it. I would love to take it. If not, that's okay. But I can take it. Also, feel free to take a video of, or not a video, a picture.
I usually,
Oh, it's so cute.
I usually, oh, thank you. A little constellation.
I love it.